Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Big Home Ed Conversations. You are here with myself, Kelly Rigg. I'm a home ed mum of two, founder of Off-Roading Motherhood, and a qualified mindset coach. I am ridiculously passionate about supporting parents and neurodivergent families as they navigate the transition from mainstream schooling or whatever they're doing before into home education and really embracing the lifestyle. I'm here together with my co-host, Ashley Venerio. She's a fellow home ed mum of three and a former primary teacher. We essentially created the Big Home Ed Conversations podcast with what began as honest, heartfelt talks around the coffee table, us holding each other accountable. And it's now grown into a space where hundreds of listeners now tune in for real, unfiltered conversations about mindset, behavior challenges, educational philosophies, and the emotional journey of alternative education. We do our best to cut through the noise and focus on what really matters to home educating families, offering clarity, confidence, and community in every episode. So as you guys know, we start our episodes with a little bit of gratitude, and we are actually both feeling really grateful for an opportunity that has been afforded us by Outschool. They reached out to us a little while ago, offering us a sponsored opportunity to offer our honest reviews, just participating in their platform, giving it a really good once over. And me and Ashley have been really enjoying digging in and doing some fun stuff with our kids. And we kind of wanted to give you an opportunity over the next few weeks to let you know a little bit more about what it might be able to offer you as a home educating parent.
You haven't heard about School before. It's an online platform that's been around since 2015 and was built for home educators, offering live classes, self-paced courses, and tutoring that really match your kids' interests and learning style. We've started using Outschool in COVID, actually, and loved the music and dance courses we took. And more recently, this summer, we are taking French, coding, and are even about to start a horse medicine course.
It's so random, isn't it? I mean, I was genuinely
know.
shocked when I started looking through it and seeing just how niche some of these classes actually are. My kids are both neurodivergent, as those of you who listen will know. And actually, group settings can be really intimidating for them and can actually lock them down. They don't interact with the learning in the way that I really would love them to. Whereas if I take some of the stuff from those classes home, usually I can do it with them at home later, but they just can't access it there in person. So online classes have been a winner for us in the past. My son really enjoys the act of kind of putting his hand up and getting to interject and chat to the teacher. And he doesn't feel that intimidation of the group of people who are there, which is really, really exciting. So when we started having a quick look, it's really very funny. So we were looking through the platform and initially saw that they were massively into SEND. 55% of their users have SEND kids, which is just incredible. It really demonstrates how neuroaffirming the platform is actually and how useful this is for SEND families, which was reassuring for me and definitely made me want to go further and actually really dig into the platform and see what they had. But I was really looking for something very niche and I really was not expecting it to provide. But my son is massively into elemental magic and dragons and all kinds of random stuff. And no kidding, put in those things into the search bar and it came up with this incredible series of 4 self-paced courses to build your own polymer clay elemental dragons, and like 4 different poses, loads of different kind of styling kind of tips for each one. And we've done the first one together. We need to do some more now. But when the summer kind of tails off and all of your clubs and groups and stuff stop as a home educator, it can be really hard to keep them busy and to come up with ideas. And we're still like, as parents, like we've got stuff to do too, right? So these sorts of opportunities are really great for them to just dig in when you need it. So you can just, like the self-paced ones are fantastic because you can just sit them down, put it on. I mean, I did sit and do this one with them because I was having fun too. But the ultimate kind of goal here is that they can definitely sit and follow the next one by themselves and have a go on their own. But I think we just have to be really mindful that these opportunities are out there. And if we're struggling as home educating parents to actually offer some kind of subjects that we just have no clue about, or that ultimately we don't really have the time or energy to do a whole curriculum for, or whatever it might be, that unschooled, project-based, fully scheduled, whatever your kids' experience of home ed looks like, it's a great way to harness their unique interests and to offer them something really exciting and unique. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I just think it's going to be really exciting seeing what else we kind of end up trying over the summer. So I hope that you guys like the sound of it so far. We're going to tell you a little bit more about it each week and some other stats and information about it so that you can get to know it a bit more. But if you are keen to give this a go and to actually try it out for yourselves, we have got a special code for you right now. So you can get $35 off of your family's first month for a limited time when you use the link outschool.com home ed, which is all in capitals. So home ed is all in capitals. And then use the code HOMED35. So as long as you go through that link and you use that code, you will get that credit. And that will allow you to obviously get in there and to try some stuff out and to see what you think. So you can go and enjoy it and see what you get on with. But we'll tell you a bit more about it next week. So we found ourselves getting into a conversation as we went to start recording this today, trying to decide what we were going to talk to you all about. And the conversation just got so good that we're just like, stop. Let's just have this conversation live, because actually this is a great episode in and of itself. Every now and then we get a bit stuck, don't we, Ashley? And we're thinking, I don't know what we're going to talk about this week. This is where my head's at. This is all I can think about. And ultimately,
Or
both
we
of
just
us.
change our, we just change our, like we have a plan, but we change our mind.
Yeah, we do change our minds. But sometimes we have an idea of what we want to say, and then it's just like, no, I'm not really feeling that, or that's not really something I feel like I could talk easily about this week. But ultimately, we were both saying that right now our heads are very much in planning mode. And I know that it's really interesting because whether you kind of follow things quite seasonally, so a lot of people love to do their planning in the spring when you have that lovely go energy, you're ready for like a new refresh, etc. And I mean, what I tend to do is just plan kind of as a subject wanes. So we've been doing oceans up until recently. I've noticed that they'd stopped talking about it. They weren't really asking any more questions about it. We'd kind of both naturally moved on. And ultimately, it's led us to need to do some more planning because we've got to actually get on to the next subject. And as someone with ADHD, I've noticed that if I don't do any planning and I just allow life to just bumble along and just try and come up with something on the fly, then actually what that does is that kind of decision fatigue for me becomes such a real problem. I lose my creativity, I lose my interest, and actually then I really struggle to engage with them in their learning because they're bored, I don't know what to do, they don't know what to do, and we're all just stuck. And it's just like, well, this is like the blind leading the blind right now, like we're getting nowhere. And so for me, if I can just allow myself to get into like almost like work mode, and I go into like the zone for a few hours and I just really bosh out some planning, then actually that allows me to then spark, it gets my creative juices flowing, and then I'm able to kind of get loads of ideas written out and done. And I have used AI a lot this time as well to really help me. But ultimately, it's just something which then allows me to feel like I've got some ideas that sticks. I've got this amazing sheet, sticks on my fridge. It's just one A4 sheet with loads of ideas, so that when I am bored, I have got so many things that I can pull from. I can just scroll my eyes through that like amazing sheet of ideas, pick something, and like whatever we have got the spoons for in that moment, we will do that. And I don't care what order any of those things get done in. And obviously, aside from anything that has a logical progression, most things are individual, one-off. We could just do it in a fun 15-20 minute space of time. So yeah, it just helps me to feel more relaxed. So I'm very much in planning mode myself, but we were kind of talking about how you even get to the point of having a plan. Because like, again, typically teachers in a school are dealing with 1 year group. They've got a defined curriculum. They've got defined learning goals. And as home educators, that's not really how it works, is it? We tend to have our own, we've got, well, however many different kids you've got, however many different ages, all of which are kind of being dragged along for the ride on whatever you're teaching, whichever one of them, they're all going to be kind of there to witness it and be a part of it anyway. So you kind of, it's really complicated sometimes, but also I think it's quite fun because you get to choose, you get to decide where you want to go with something. But I know that Ashley was telling me about her fun planning this week, because I think you are like fully immersed this week, aren't you?
It just sort of happened. So, I mean, you touched on a couple of good points around like needing to plan, or it's either too much in the moment and nothing gets done, or the stress of like having to figure it out on a Sunday night. All of that definitely comes into play. And I feel like it was fine in the earlier years, but now that my kids are getting a bit older, we're trying to do things that maybe require more of an ongoing process that I need. This year has got to have a different approach. Like it has to be a little more in depth for me, or a little more structured. Well, I'm sure still being wildly unstructured, but mostly structured. So more this past week on Instagram, a lot of the American home educators that I follow, they were doing a series where each day they talked about the subjects they're planning for the fall. So a lot of American schools are actually starting quite soon. So that kind of mid-August timeframe into early September. So everything on socials right now for the US is planning, what are we doing? How is it starting off for the new school year? And I feel like even if you school year round, which I would say we do, although this year we had kind of a more lengthy break than we typically would have, it still is sort of a reset in that September timeframe. You're maybe starting a new curriculum, you're moving to the next grade level, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
So I feel like I was bombarded with curriculum choices. What are people using for the different subjects? And I've already sort of been on this planning mode journey. And now I'm really trying to parcel out, like, what are we using? And I love to pull from things and sort of create my own, which is obviously tailored to what the girls need and feel like is important, but it also is a lot of legwork. So I definitely wouldn't recommend that for your first year of home educating. I would probably just pick
Hmm.
something
Yeah.
straightforward, stick with one source, whatever that looks like, just to not make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Hmm.
But I was saying when we were chatting earlier that right now I'm really into language arts, which I think is different. So when you hear like language arts in England, like what is that?
Yeah, so I think we just call it English. So you do tend to
Okay.
learn languages. So you tend to maybe have like German or French, or you do something kind of on the side
Sure.
of it. But in the UK, typically it's just referred to as English or
Okay.
literacy, maybe as
Okay.
well.
And so for us, it's like, would we say language arts, which actually more recently is English language arts. I hear a lot of ELA now. It's reading, so obviously all the phonics and everything within that. It's writing, it's literature, it's grammar, maybe something else that I'm missing. But I typically think of it as five prongs. So I think I'm lacking something. But spelling.
That's all right.
Spelling.
Spelling. There we go.
There it is. There it is. Okay. So those are the things that I'm looking at. And you can absolutely get a curriculum that has it all in one. So I think if you look at like The Good and the Beautiful, which is a popular homeschool program because it is free to use if you buy that or just download the online version and print it yourself.
Hmm.
And it's very comprehensive. Lots of families really love it. We've used it in the past. And I still even kind of look at them to see what they cover from a scope and sequence perspective
Hmm.
each year, and you can pull some things out of their programs. But anyway, so very heavy into language arts right now. And I feel like it's just like, okay, let me plan out my read alouds. What books are we looking at? Where are we pulling this from? How are we going to approach spelling? Are we going to do it as a group? Because I feel like we really could do it as a group, even though my girls are like separate in age,
Hmm.
because start at the beginning. We've not really done a ton of formal spelling. It's just sort of been naturally through reading and writing.
Yeah, my two seem to be developing spelling really naturally, actually. It's something which I
Yeah,
wasn't really expecting to happen. My son's like cognitive understanding of spelling recently seems to have just clicked. Like he can almost spell whatever you chuck at him now, which I just find really fascinating. Obviously, like really obscure words he still struggles with, but for the most
sure.
part, he is, yeah, it just amazes me that their brains do seem to just link it all together quite naturally. But yeah, we tend to do spelling together as a game, so it tends to be more as a fun. They both get different words chucked at them for sure at their level, but we just
Yeah,
tend to do it as a group fun game as opposed to any kind of like real practice. They don't know
yeah,
they don't realize it's practice.
yeah. Well, that's a good thing too, because the out loud portion, we don't spell out loud
Hmm.
unless they say, "How do you spell this?" And then I'll
Hmm.
obviously. But I noticed that this is something that feels more unique to English speakers
Hmm.
because, for example, obviously a lot of what we compare to is Italian, and that language is so phonetic that they don't know spelling. So it's
Hmm.
really funny if I ask an Italian to spell something, they sound it out. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, that's not helpful. Tell me the letters.
Even I can slow down and say all the
Like,
sounds in
yeah,
a word.
I still don't know. And I was talking to my American friend when I was there this summer, and she was saying that she's fantastic at the language. She's lived there like over 20 years. Her
Hmm.
daughters have been in school there. They were born there. So she's helped with homework and stuff throughout the years. And she was saying that even her girls will say to her, like, what do you mean you don't hear the double L or the double whatever the letter is? Because it's not our language.
Mm,
So it's one of those things where I still am like, is it a double L? Is it not a double L? Is it,
mm,
those are the little things that even if you relatively can spell in that language, there are still some times where you might not be sure what letters are doubled. Double R,
yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
her daughters were like, you can't hear it, and they'll slow it down. And she's like, even if you slow it down, I don't
Well, I
understand.
think that's
I
the
don't.
thing. Like, my son really loves Duolingo and he uses that on and off. He's quite sporadic with it, but every now and then he'll get in the mood to do it. And he recently wanted to go back to learning German. And he kept saying things like wetter instead of vetter. And I'm just like, no, no. In German, the W is a V sound. And he's like, why? And I'm just like, oh, don't ask. I don't know. But this is just the problem with languages, is that it looks like a word to ask, but actually that's not how it's said. And that's why it's
Yes.
so important to be practicing it out loud and to write it down and to see what it looks like both ways. And I think this is, yeah, it's so complicated when, so like coming back around to this kind of conversation that we're getting onto, is like this concept of like planning and like how linear you make it. And actually,
Yeah.
I know that in schools, obviously they have a set developmental curriculum for each stage. And we talk about children falling behind, which I think in the schooling sense does to some degree need to be used, because actually the truth is that the curriculum carries on moving on. And if a child hasn't grasped a concept, eventually, like, yes, okay, not immediately, a teacher will continue to support them to try and get them up to that level, but eventually they've got to move on because everybody else needs to move on to the next stage, and that child will obviously hopefully get some additional support, but we obviously know doesn't always do so. So the concept of linear and progressive learning in a really natural form is really quite tricky to achieve when you've got, like, you've still got stuff need to cover. We need to move on to the next stage. And one of the things I love about home education, and for us as well, because we often do things quite naturally and let them just meet progressive stages when they meet them, but actually it becomes quite, I don't know, when I'm started planning and I'm trying to think, right, what stage are they actually at? What are they understanding? What don't they understand? I actually do use the national curriculum to then just do a quick reflection. So I'm not necessarily looking at it to want to follow it verbatim, to achieve it by a certain year group, whatever. But I do look at it and say, okay, so in year one, they would typically be expected to be able to, I don't know, add up to 20, like whatever. So,
Yeah.
okay, are they at that stage? Yes or no? Like, what level are they at? Do I think they'll have achieved that naturally by the end of this term? How can I then offer them opportunities to progress on that skill? So this is one example. And this can sometimes feel super overwhelming. So for those of you listening who are thinking, oh my goodness, have I really got to be that granular? No, you don't. And an awful lot of things will naturally get there without you doing that. But what I've found is that sometimes you might look at that, and I read through the developmental
Mhm.
goals and I think, oh gosh, have we talked about 3D shapes at all? No, not really. And then I think to myself, okay, well, where's the relevance? Like, how does this apply to them? Like, where could they actually be thinking about using 3D shapes without me even thinking about it? Like, actually, let's try and notice for a couple of days. Like, let's see if 3D shapes are coming up. And obviously they've got things like Minecraft, and they build with physical shapes, and they create things out of Lego, and they draw and all the things, right? So there are lots of different, like, obviously as well, you could talk about it in the sense of architecture or cars
Sure.
or spotting things when you're out on fun walks. Just, we do love, my kids love a shape walk. I don't understand it at all. They love pointing out all the fun shapes they can see. If you start that game, then they just love it and they point them out everywhere. But ultimately, if you think that there's a weak point somewhere, like something which you haven't touched on, that suddenly you get that dread in the pit of your stomach, like, oh my goodness, have we ever covered shapes? I don't think we have. I did this once to my son. I think he must have been like about year one age, reception age, somewhere around there. But I was reading through it and I realized that we hadn't ever done anything formally on patterns. And I suddenly panicked, because obviously patterns are superbly important for coding and computing, and like for language and for maths. Like, that actually kind of, it's very well integrated into all subjects. Patterns of behavior, patterns in history, like, there's patterns are very important as a very fundamental concept in human nature, and nature as a whole. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like, I don't think I've ever even talked to him about these, like, patterns in the sense of like a mathematics sit there and do it properly. And so I poured a load of random cereal on the table, different shapes and sort of colors, etc., like hoops and squares and stuff. And I made a pattern. I just sat there just playing, just making a pattern with the cereal. And he interjected and he finished the pattern off for me. He carried it on along the table. And I was like, what are you doing? And he was like, I'm making a pattern with you. And I'm just like, oh, you know what a pattern is? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, can you make one? And he made me one. And then he made a more complicated one. And then he had fun doing another one. And I was like, okay, so we know this. Like, I don't exactly know how we have formally understood the concept of a pattern, but we know it. So actually, okay, good, tick, fine. Like, we can just carry on. And so a lot of my planning isn't actually as fine grained as that, because I don't always think it's necessary. Like, as I said earlier, spelling is naturally just seemingly just falling into place. And of course, some children who might be dyslexic or have special needs, or they might just not be prioritizing it in their own learning journey. They might be really interested in maths, or they might be really interested in science, or certain sort of tactile skills, or whatever. They might have other kind of priorities themselves. So they may not develop these skills quite naturally. My son is massively into reading at the minute because he's gotten into a series of books that he really likes, Percy Jackson series and the How to Train Your Dragon series. He's loving those at the minute. So he is reading a lot more. So his vocabulary is building, which means that his concept of spelling is building and his sight words are building. So all of these things are becoming more natural, and meaning that if I give him a random spelling, he's seen that word dozens of times. And so his brain now has a recollection of how it's spelled. And I think that as a child, there was so much anxiety around spelling and reading and writing that actually I can see a love for it building. And I don't want to ruin it. So a lot of my planning doesn't involve necessarily a curriculum. It does keep the UK national curriculum in mind, just for my own sanity, so I don't feel like I'm missing massive gaps or chunks in their learning. But ultimately, I actually do a lot of my planning myself, but that's because I enjoy it. So, like, there's a lot of us out there who home educate who would actually find the planning so ridiculously stressful. And there are some really fantastically built stuff out there that you can just grab and use. So if that's not your bag and you actually, that makes you want to cry into your hat, then yeah, just find something that you align well with, read it through, make sure that you are happy with the content. Don't feel like you've got to be teaching something that you don't agree with or you don't believe is right for them. But you can ultimately, yeah, there's lots of different ways of going about this.
Well, it provides a good structure, right? It gives you a framework. And I think that's really important, because it's easy to say, like, I don't want to even look because I don't like the education system, or I don't agree with a certain aspect of it. But it is something to come back to. There is good in there.
Mm-hmm.
A recent example of this is, we were looking for some read alouds to do, and I always go back to American lists and books that the schools are recommending, because there are some good books in there. Like, not all of them, but a lot of them are great. And they're ones like, we had this whole conversation, me and this other American, about The Bridge to Terabithia. And I don't know if that's a book that was read over here, but man, is it like a heavy topic. Go read about it. It has some, like, it pulls at your heartstrings. It's a bit of a tearjerker. And I was like, I can't expose my girls to that yet. But, like, they're books that you remember, right? They had a big impact on you as a kid. And so there are good things in there. So we looked at the UK list, and it had books I'd never heard of, and some of them looked amazing. So I was like, okay, this is great. Like, I absolutely am going to be reading some of these. They look fantastic. And I think the difference that I struggle with personally is the key stages. So in the States, it's all broken down by grade level. So first grade, second grade, third grade, right, all the way up through 12th grade.
Yeah.
And the key stages go a lot, I feel like, by age.
Yeah,
and
they're over
then
a chunk of years.
and
So,
they
like,
it's a couple years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, for me, it's harder just because I'm just not familiar with it. I didn't teach that way. I didn't grow up that way personally. So I still stick to, and I actually have this book right here, which are these books about, like, what your fourth grader needs to know, what your first grader needs to know, what your kindergartner needs to know. And they kind of take that approach
It's a hefty
where
looking book.
it's really big. The reason why is because it has all the information in it. So it doesn't just give you the topics.
I see.
It tells you everything with literature, math, history, science, and the arts. And it's really cool, because if you want to grab a couple of things from this, you can. If you have your own resource for it, like you don't have to. But sometimes there's a really good map in here, or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it really explains something well. So, as an
Mm-hmm.
example, I am one of the short stories that we're going to be reading as part of our language arts is about the Revolutionary War. And I was like, okay, I want to build like a tiny unit study around this because we've not studied that. And my daughter is not going to understand the context of the story, right? Because she won't know what the Revolutionary War was about, why it took place. We haven't done that. So I said, okay, when we read this, I just want a very short, like I want to spend, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes on this and
Mm-hmm.
then move on to the actual literature portion.
Yeah.
But we will have a little bit of history. And so I just was like, okay, what do I already have on hand? So obviously the first thing I did was go into AI and say, explain this
Mm-hmm.
war to me briefly to give some context to an 11-year-old. And then it spit out some stuff. And I said, okay, now I want to involve slavery because the literature touches on that.
Mm-hmm.
Who supported it? Who was against it? How did it start? What countries participated in, an owned person, like a slavery type of
Mm-hmm.
concept? And again, briefly for an 11-year-old to give some context. So we did that. And then I said, okay, this is really helpful. That's going to be something we're going to read. It recommended a video. We're going to watch this video. I looked it on YouTube. It was great. And then I went into this book because it's in the What Your Fourth Grader Needs to Know book, which I just found obviously by looking at the index. And then it has a really brief introduction to the American Revolutionary War. And it has a couple of pictures. It talks about without representation, right? So I'm going through this and I'm like, okay, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something we could quickly read as well, maybe the second day, just as a reminder. So I'm thinking about, okay, how am
Yeah.
I breaking this up? How are we incorporating it? And sometimes these little books are really good for that because
Yeah.
they do have kind of like a textbook feel, but they're also written
In a way that they will enjoy listening to it.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. More
mostly.
accessible.
I'll summarize a bit, but yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I think learning like really needs to be intentional sometimes. And I think not all the time. And it can be 100% like lots of people follow very loose and relaxed kind of structure. But actually, sometimes we know that offering a bit more insight and depth into a subject can really help, but sometimes actually trying to do that in the moment, because there's a very good chance as you started reading that book that she may have developed some concept of understanding by listening to the book, but then she would also then maybe start to have questions. And if you're not feeling very prepared, yes, okay, you could have done that in the moment. You could have stopped, you could have asked the question on AI, you could have had a chat with her about it in the moment. You can absolutely do it that way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But sometimes if we are thinking to ourselves, okay, this is a subject we're going to cover, I don't know an awful lot, or I actually need a little bit more context, so that when they ask the questions, I've got some answers and I can help them have that like back and forth conversation quickly and efficiently, so we don't get off topic or get distracted or it takes too long. Because that's the other thing that can happen sometimes is we get into a subject and Mighty will start asking questions, which is fantastic. But then I don't know the answers. So then we're on AI and then we're looking up a video and then we're watching something on
Yes.
YouTube. And then before I know it, an hour's gone by. We haven't finished the subject that I wanted to talk to them about. And now they've done and they need to move on and go do something else.
Exactly.
And ultimately they will just disappear off and be like, great, okay, try and bookmark where were we at in this conversation. We'll try and pick it
Exactly.
up again another time. And it can get really quite stressful, I think, to then know if you've actually finished something or if you've covered it enough to have really actually drilled home the point that you were trying to make. And I mean, my kids this term have decided they wanted to do how things are made, which is obviously such a fantastic broad headline because it could be anything.
Yes.
And we're saying about this kind of like this linear progression of learning, that this kind of the kind of core of this conversation to some degree. But it was just quite funny because we started talking about this as well, which is like, actually, we want to start talking about this. Like, where does it actually begin? Like, if I want to talk about how things are made, then you can't help but talk about the fact that, okay, so this is like natural things, how they're made. And then you've got obviously man-made things, how those things are made. And it sparks off some initial really great talking points. Like, for example, I said to my kids, I said, can you look around this house and find anything that didn't require some natural resources to bring it about, to make it exist? And they were really like hunting around, being like, this, like holding up some plastic. It's like a great answer. And just like, no. So plastic is made of, and like listed the kind of the elements and the things that go into it. And obviously it's mostly made from fossil fuels, which obviously we know fossil fuels are made of literally fossils, dead creatures from long ago. So actually, no, they are literally being made from natural resources that are just being processed in a certain way to make them like very non-biodegradable, etc. So no, actually plastic is still a natural based like resource. And it was really, really funny because the conversation went on for ages and they were really struggling. They're like, I don't know, nothing. I'm just like, correct answer. Like literally every single thing you can see has some root in natural resource that we have mined or created or processed in some way to create something else, combined different things. But it obviously then it got us onto the molecular structure of things and like what things look like at a molecular level, like a Lego brick, and all kinds of really cool stuff. And you can get AI to produce you these amazing like imageries. And if you talk to it about kind of like what does a Lego brick look like at its molecular level, it can show you a graphic of what that looks like. Which is just really fun. And the kids got really into these. Like again, we did some great stories, started doing bedtime stories about how different random things are made and just getting AI to come up with a fun story. Which is just really interesting. And I think it sparked a lot of initial inspiration, but it has gradually led us to be like, well, if we're talking molecular level, then we need to talk atomic structure. And if we're going to talk atoms, then they need to know what an atom is. And actually, to know what an atom is, you need to know about quarks. And they need to know about the Big Bang Theory. They need to know about. I was just like,
Well, this is the
where
thing.
does it actually
This is
begin?
exactly. And we were talking about this with like history because
Mm-hmm.
I was saying about how one of the things that we're looking at is history. And I was like, okay, do we want to do American history or do we, which is, I think, grade level appropriate for one of my kids, if not both,
Mm-hmm.
actually, if we were in the American system. And then, but we're here in England. So then we want to do like a British history so we can go and explore places where these things happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, maybe, but do we want to continue with like this sort of foundation of history, which is like, where did we come from? How did we get to be in the countries that we're in, et cetera? Because we did a lot last year on like the Bronze Age and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, well, or do we want to we've never really gone back to like before ancient civilization, like the Earth's history. So do we want to do that? Or is that just like an adult's mind of let's do things in a linear order?
Yeah.
Whereas like the kids are more than happy to hop around.
Mm-hmm.
Like they kind of gain that linear framework later in like the
Yeah.
middle and high school levels. And like it's okay to kind of do things in bits and pieces. But then at the same time, I'm like, well, gosh, it's really interesting for me because of the way that I learned, like I didn't put together some of the historical events that actually happened at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you have a different concept of time and you're like, oh, wait, when did Anne Frank live? Oh, wait, when did Martin Luther King Jr. live? Like,
Mm-hmm.
wait, what was going on at the same time as like Jewish persecution and Nazis and all of this? Like, actually,
Mm-hmm.
there are things that overlap that you don't realize because of the way that they were taught in school
Yeah.
for us. So we
Yeah.
kind of have compartmentalized these things that actually all happened simultaneously. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
timelines are really important, especially when we're looking at history, obviously. And so I'm like, okay, maybe we are going to go back and talk about the Big Bang. Like maybe we are going to start at least
Mm-hmm.
briefly. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have like a college degree on this, but just like a
Yeah.
conversational piece. And then that does kind of flow into other things. So how are we going to tie science in? Or it's interesting. So this is why
Mm.
the planning is important. And I'm not saying I'm planning for the next 12 months, but let's just talk about between now and Christmas. Like, what are we
Yeah. Kind
trying
of
to
kick-starting
accomplish?
things a bit.
Yeah. And because I was also, I think we talked about this earlier about like the crucial, like that 6-week period of like getting into the flow
Mm.
and how it's actually really hard to find 6 weeks without any kind of interruption because
Mm-hmm.
there's so much that happens, especially in the fall with like the holidays that come up, at least for Americans, right? Because then you got back to school in September, then you have Halloween, then in November you've got Thanksgiving, then you've got Christmas. So there's so much with that we want to naturally do. It does take a bit of planning. at
Yeah.
least a little bit. So,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
think what we also have to be mindful of, and I literally am so guilty of this. So last night I ended up having a little mini tantrum because I was trying to explain something to the kids. I often use meal times as an opportunity to have discussions and to go deeper on subjects that we've talked about that day, or to get them to
Mm.
like recap a little bit and to tell their dad a bit about what we've been doing that day to demonstrate learning. And obviously, on the line of inventions, my son had picked out a book from the library about Leonardo da Vinci. And we started to recap what we'd learned about him that day. And I am really trying to drill home the concept that human beings make things to solve problems, but that when we make something to solve a problem, we quite often create another problem, and that we have to be really mindful. Like, so when we're actually creating solutions, we have to really think about the possible detrimental impact that these things might have. So, like, we might have created something for a good purpose, but we have to think about the fact that that could also be used for a bad one. And
Well,
equally,
I'll have to interject you really quickly because there is just side note for anyone who's into like reading. There is a fabulous book that talks about this. It's called, I
mm,
think it's called either All Our Wrong Todays or All Our Wrong Tomorrows. I always get that confused, but go look. It's so
I
good.
will definitely try and
And
find that.
it talks about how when you create something, you create a problem. So the best example is you create the car. What's the problem? The car accident, right? So
Mm.
like
Or the lack of
when you
walking and the reduction in fitness and
to-
like, yeah, so many
totally.
things. Yeah.
But this book specifically, like, it's so good. Oh my gosh, it's so good. So
Hmm.
go read that if that's just for parents. But it's such a, it highlights that concept in such a
Mm.
way. Anyway, yeah,
Yeah, fascinating. So yeah, so I was trying to have this conversation and trying to get him to remember, like we talked about it earlier in the day about why people invent things. And he was just like he's just doing his usual kind of wasn't really engaged, didn't really want to actually try and remember. And so he was just finding it very difficult to access the memories because when I'd mentioned Leonardo da Vinci, he was suddenly remembering all the stuff he'd learned from the book. Now, we basically really enjoyed the fact that he found it really instantly fascinating that Leonardo da Vinci was essentially, he was left-handed, but he taught himself to use his right hand so that he could write well with both hands. And he used to like writing words backwards. So he would form a word because he was left-handed, obviously they reckon that's why, that he would write a word backwards. So he'd write from right to left across the page so that he wouldn't smudge it. It's just stuff like this is like really random. And then like mirror writing, that he used to do mirror writing in some of his work as well. And so he was really enjoying holding up, that had some text in the book to hold up to the mirror that you could then read it because it's now the right way around. So he was like, he'd found a piece of paper where you could see the text through the other side of it. So he was holding it up to the mirror and he was like, look, I can read it now because it's in the mirror because I'm reading it through the back of the piece of paper and all the rest of it. And he'd gotten so totally distracted and sidetracked by it. And at the time, I was trying to talk to him about something and I was getting annoyed that he was going off on a tangent and he was like really interested in, like, he was basically, he went and got a piece of paper and he wrote his name with one hand and then he wrote it with the other hand and then my other one had a go and then my husband had a go and I had a go, and it completely derailed the conversation. And it was only later, like, because just in the moment I was just tired and grumpy and clearly had no patience left in my day, that it annoyed me. But I was looking at it later and just like, honestly, why can't you see in the moment how incredible this is? Like, actually, you are asking him to reflect on his day. And sure, okay, you
yeah,
hadn't remembered the abstract conversation that you'd had with him about how problems create problems and like solutions create problems, sorry, and all the rest of it. And you wanted to try and make sure he'd really like understood that and it's a core theme of what we're trying to learn about as we're trying to do this, because I just think it's really important for us to understand as humans that not everything we do is actually a good thing. We should sometimes
yeah.
stop and pause before we like break something else, but that ultimately I was getting annoyed that that conversation, that thread of planning wasn't going the way I wanted it to, because he'd gotten really enthusiastic and engaged about writing, for crying out loud.
The wrong thing.
I was like, why am I finding it annoying that he's trying to now practice writing with his other hand? For goodness sake, it's all good practice. I'm just like, I never get him to write. He's never interested in writing. But now he's got a reason to be interested in writing because he can practice trying to write it backwards and trying to write it with his other
Yeah,
hand, which, yes, totally could lead to more problems down the line. But we'll see how it goes. But the fun in that for him, the relevance that he'd then found in writing was super, super important. And actually, this morning, I found myself apologizing to him for getting irritated at the dinner table and just saying I was really, really tired and I definitely did not appreciate how enthusiastic you're being. And I'm really like excited for you that you're finding this fun. And no, I'm not necessarily going to set him any challenges with it. I am going to allow him to just enjoy that and play with it and be silly with it and just like have fun with it, because sometimes you can ruin it by planning and putting ideas on it. So I think that's the other thing to kind of factor in here, is that not everything needs to be planned. Not everything needs to be perfect. If your plan goes out the window a little bit on a subject because actually you planned something, but then it's really not taking and they're not interested in it, then it's being conscious for like, so we're talking as two relatively seasoned home educators at this point. Like, we have been educating our kids at home for several years. At this point, it has become quite natural to know the kind of learning they enjoy, the kind of thing they respond to, the kind of places they will engage with, the subjects they are likely to really dive in and be enjoying, the visual, the tactile, the crafts, the whatever, the science experiments. We know at this point the kinds of things they're going to actually enjoy and engage with. And often, like, my kids, I'll say to them, like, oh, I've done loads of school today. And they'll be like, when? Like, we didn't do any school today. And they just won't even realize, because it's the stuff we've been doing is also stuff they consider to be fun. And I think ultimately, like, that's not every day, don't get me wrong, I'm not superwoman, but we do have lots of days like that where they don't realize, but I have witnessed an awful lot of learning going on. And so I think it's really important to both do, my light level planning is literally, it's one A4 page. It's got loads of really short, easy grab, like a few minutes here, 15 minutes there, tasks and ideas of things that we can do to help pick up bits of the national curriculum maybe that we have been lacking in a little bit, that we maybe could do with doing a bit more in, or just ideas for fun activities to do, or stuff that will help them to develop more in the concept and understand how, like, obviously, and inventions and making stuff applies to every element of history. So it's really fantastic. It's science, it's maths, it's marketing, it's writing, it's imagery, it's crafting, it's creating, it's all kinds of amazing things. It covers literally pretty much every single skill out there, which is why I think so many of us get drawn to coming up with our own ideas and making something. But ultimately, the planning will not be the only stuff we do. And it certainly will not be something which I will live and die by. If we don't do it all, we won't do it all. I will file that thing away. And anything we haven't done is fodder for future terms, when I can then pull it back out again in a couple of years' time when they're interested in this sort of thing again. And I can say, oh, actually, we did a topic on this a little while ago. Let me just go back and see what we didn't do. And there might be some great ideas in there. And ultimately, it just gives us inspiration and ideas. And as I say, you're following them. So you are seeing where they're at and you're observing them and you're noticing where they're at. And so I don't massively stress planning. I see it as quite a fun process because I'm quite a creative person. I quite enjoy it. But if that's not you and you actually find it quite stressful, then you don't even need to do planning. This is literally just something which I've found has helped me to stay a little bit saner. But for a lot of families, feeling your way through it is also fine. And you might just find as they get older that it just helps you to feel a little bit more relaxed if you know that they are kind of like, if they're working towards a goal. So say, for example, they have decided they want to sit certain GCSEs or something, you are probably going to need to have some element of planning to cover the topics that will come up on those papers, to make sure that they are able to actually tick the box and get the qualification. That it's not always going to be able to be completely free flow. But I suspect that, like, when I kind of reflect on my GCSE level biology and the stuff that I understood at that level, there's an awful lot that we're talking about already. Mm-hmm. Because these things naturally come up if you are following a more meandery path through a subject at younger ages too. And so the foundations are being laid with every random conversation and activity you do, which I think is really exciting. But I don't massively stress it. I do kind of feel like actually they will reach those points of wanting to get qualifications in something, and actually they will have a really good grasping of it. And I think, like, yeah, the whole, like, history jumping around all over the place. I know that I had absolutely no concept of the linear timeline of history. Like, it was very recent that I actually found myself feeling like I understood that, and grasping how long ago things actually happened. Like, when I think about the fact that when I was born, the Second World War had only ended, like, 45 years before, which is just crazy when I think about it now, when it's like coming up to like my 40th in a few years' time. Like, that's, to think that in just my lifetime, that's all it had been. Like, that's all it had been. Like, that's crazy to me. That we kind of look at history sometimes and see it as being a million miles away, but actually the relevance is still very much current. And I think it's very difficult in the world that our kids live in as well. If you think about what they see when they look out into the world, and the technology they see and the experiences they have, that actually the world looks so very different to how it would have looked 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And so it can look really abstract, can't it? It can look really
Yeah,
confusing for them.
exactly. And it's not necessarily all like new stuff that we're learning. Like, for example, obviously what happened in World War II, that situation is happening in other countries and cultures as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even that like yeah, we can get a whole another conversation here about what we have learned and have not learned from history. But
Yeah.
so it's also just relative to like what you've read and learned and heard
Yeah.
about. So all of that is important. But then even thinking about like, I don't know, I felt like when you learn about like Cleopatra, for example, and Egypt, ancient Egypt, I always thought like pyramids were made and Cleopatra lived in them. That is not how it happened. They were made a really long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really interesting, like to look at things in that way. And I think that's where I'm hoping my kids will find a little bit of interest in that this year as well. Now, obviously, they don't know all of the things to know that it's interesting yet, but hopefully when
No.
we look at them, it'll feel that way because it is frustrating. I guess it gives you an opportunity really as you're doing some of this planning to reflect on your education and
Yeah.
where there might have been some misses or some opportunities to do things a little bit differently or in a way that would have made more sense to you. And then you can apply that to your children. I think the other thing that I'm looking at as I'm planning, which has nothing to do with the actual learning and academics, is more of like, what other aspects do we want in our day? Like, do we want to have like a particular tone for the mornings? Are we planning a, like I've been trying to maybe make a few more breakfasts versus just have cereal. Like, let's take turns making muffins and kind of have that routine as part of it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be academic planning that you're
No.
doing. It could be more of like, what what do we want our days to feel like? Do we want to come together at 5 p.m. for a board game every day
Mm-hmm.
or a read aloud every day and kind of wind our days down like that?
Yeah.
Do we want to start our days off with some exercise? What is that going to look like?
Mm-hmm.
I found some really so talk about rabbit trails. I found some really interesting like balance work and coordination and like left brain, right brain exercises, crossing
Mm.
the central plane of our bodies, things like that. And I'm like, gosh, these are really easy and quick and they're fun. They're like little games.
Mm-hmm.
So, we might start our day with something like that. Like there was this one where this woman took like masking tape and made a big square on the floor for each of her kids and blindfolded them and had them march in place and see if you could stay in the box. And then, after like 30 seconds, you take your blindfolds off and the kids were like miles away from their box, but they thought they were marching in place. So just things like that. It's really
Mm.
interesting, right? And ways to wake up our senses and have a little physical activity, a little bit of fun. So even components like that, I always mean to do it. I feel like it doesn't happen. So trying to be a little more intentional about that kind of stuff this year. And again, like you were saying, you can always find a time to reset your year. So if it's not now, maybe you're looking at it at the new year, right? Making new
Mm-hmm.
intentions come late December, early January, or maybe it's springtime when you're refreshing for the new season and things are waking up and you're feeling more energized. There's always a time that you can do this.
Yeah.
I think right now, just because of socials, it feels more academic, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe take some time to pull in things that aren't academic, that are a little
Yeah.
bit more just your family's feelings
Yeah, your
and
ethos and
goals.
values.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's a really good
exactly.
point. And I think trying to actually remember that we are whole humans as well, and we're not just educating brains, um we're educating whole bodies and teaching them how to regulate and how to be kind and how to socialize and how to like all the various different challenges they might face as adults as well, like all the different kind of relationship problems or practical problems or things that they might have to engage with later. That yeah, I think that we can get very academic focused, or at the very least kind of like, yeah, what we kind of consider to be important for their childhood in terms of what school considers to be important for their childhood. But someone said to me once about school and the national curriculum is not the bar. That's not what we're aiming for. What we're
Mm-mm.
aiming for is a well-rounded, enthusiastic, like loves learning human.
Yeah.
And if your planning and your structuring that you are doing is coming from a place of fear or anxiety or stress, there's a very good chance that that planning is going to then therefore be pushed back on, because a lot of it is probably going to be pushing down journeys and directions that aren't actually particularly relevant to them, or they're not feeling particularly engaged with it, or they're going to be picking up on your reasons. And so I think definitely kind of taking a pause to think, why am I planning? What are my reasons? What is the actual goal? Like, what do I want to achieve with this? Like, is it that actually you're just really struggling to think of ideas like I do, and you could just do with having a bank of ideas to pull from? Or is it that actually they're getting older and they've got a qualification coming up, and so there really are some tick boxes that you've got to cover? Or is it that actually you're feeling like maybe they're not doing so great, or that you're worried about a certain element of their learning? There's the thing, the planning doesn't have to encompass everything. It might just be that you've noticed that they're kind of getting to like 8, 9, 10 years old and they're struggling still with their reading, and maybe you're thinking maybe they could be dyslexic and you want to offer them a bit more support. So try and just get to the reason behind the planning. And if it really is coming from a place of you just feel like they spend too much time playing and doing their own thing, and you want to try and get them wrangled and focused and all the rest of it, then actually thinking, okay, is that a good reason? It's like, what are they actually learning when they're doing all of that playing? How can I naturally feed some of this stuff in that does feel important to me, does feel important to society or whatever, but also remembering that the societal expectations and conditioning that we had about those subjects isn't necessarily the reality or the truth that we should be living. And I know that a lot of the time we segment out subjects in school, but actually you can cover off all the subjects with one topic usually.
Yeah.
Like one project can literally cover 5 or 6 different learning goals all at once without them even realizing it. It's like baking a recipe from another country is geography, it's history. You can talk about where the ingredients come from. Why do they use that ingredient so much? Oh, well, it grows really well there. Why? Because the climate's really good and it's got mountainous regions which it grows really well in, or whatever, right? That it gives you opportunities to just have a bit of a chat and to keep it really light and fun. And much like the Leonardo da Vinci thing, when they're just like randomly getting inspired by something, is to remember that those random sparks of inspiration could be something which lead to the most incredible career or opportunity in their future.
Absolutely.
And so it's fine that you're inspiring them and putting random stuff in front of them and giving them stuff to learn new things about all the time. But ultimately, if they're not engaged with it and they are pushing back on it and they're not enjoying it, and you're finding yourself just putting your hair out or getting angry or stressed and wanting to stomp away from the dining room table like I did last night, is to do that reflection, to take a pause and to look back on it and go, why? Why wasn't he interested in that conversation right then? Well, because he was engaged in something else and he was enjoying that. And actually that was
Yeah.
possibly even more relevant in that moment, and therefore was super, super great that he was doing it. So don't discount the gems of their own planning and their own ideas and their own progress that they are creating for themselves. Their opinion matters in a much bigger way than ours on a mostly daily basis, to be honest. And I think integrating what they want to learn about and offering little nudges into things which you think will be really useful to know alongside it is just as important as you sitting and having a good think by yourself and coming up with ideas. But yeah, do try and actually over time, and if this is your first year and you're just starting out, then maybe all of this is like ridiculously stressful to think about. And just literally, if that is the case, just spend some time observing them, just do some fun stuff with them, see how your days tend to pan out, and slowly, gradually get more intentional, whether that is intentionally allowing child-led education to take the lead, or whether that is intentionally putting together some curriculums and ideas for them down the line. But don't feel like you have to have this all figured out. Don't feel like you have to get it right first time. I know that I have been through at least 5 or 6 different iterations of what our home ed looks like. At least that probably changes on an almost daily basis, but it's fine for it to change and evolve. And you are going to learn and grow alongside them and get inspired by things alongside them. And if you allow it to be, it can actually become an incredibly beautiful, fun, and exhilarating at times process of really fascinatingly finding out about loads of really interesting things. So allow it to be that. Allow it to be a bit meandery sometimes, because that's where the beauty is a lot of the time, is in the random subjects you find yourself covering because they've come up with it, or you'll get a random question. I get at least one good question almost every day that makes me go, oh, do you know, I've never thought about that. or I read something or I see something on a documentary or something that makes me go, that's really cool. I like that. So yeah, look for those moments. Those are fun little glimmers, and they all add up to amazing things down the line. But anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this chat today. This was definitely just been this is what me and Ashley truly sound like when we are just sat chatting, having a coffee, and hours go by, and we go, oh, maybe we should go do something else now.
Find the kids.
Spend so much time working on our philosophy. We actually spent any time delivering it. Ha ha ha. But anyway, hope you guys are having a wonderful week and have a lovely Sunday if you are listening to it first thing on a Sunday morning, which so many of you do now, which is always very lovely to see. And tune in again next week to find out what we're going to be talking about then, because I don't think either of us know just yet, do we?
We don't.
No.
Yeah, think about it.
Send us a message. If you get to us quick enough,
yes.
you can direct where it goes. All right, guys, have a great week.
Take care. You've been listening to the Big Home Ed Conversations podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Big Home Ed Podcast for updates. We'll be back again next week for another episode, but don't forget to check out the special summer episodes, Get Your Head Straight to Home Ed. See you soon.